All right, hello, welcome to chapter 4. Just a couple quick notes before we get going here. One, you should be watching this inside of Edpuzzle, so don't be watching it YouTube, watch it inside of Edpuzzle. And then number 2 is if you just want to have your notebook out and kind of take notes as you go, that might work well. Pause the video if it gets going too fast and stuff, so you make sure you can write down the stuff we need to go. All right, chapter 4 is about looping, and there's basically two types of loop, for loop and while loop. So goal for today is to learn how to use these while loops in Java. So again, pause the video if you need to write that goal down real quick. Okay, starting kind of at the beginning here, what is the loop? All right, loop is just a code that repeats. All right, and so you can imagine that there's lots of situations where we want to do the same thing over and over again. So as an example, maybe you want to keep asking the user the same question until they answer correctly. All right, so think of a login program. You might want to loop through while they haven't answered the correct password. You keep asking them for the password, so you keep doing that code again and again until they answer correctly. So all a loop is something that repeats over, like the same line of code that gets repeated a bunch of times. Okay, so there's roughly two ways to think about loops. One is you want to perform the same operation but on like a different object each time. So say that we have an employee, so our school district has thousands of employees, all right? And so let's say they just want to be really generous and raise all their employees' pay by 25%, or 25 cents, excuse me. So the long way to do this would be is if we had a bunch of employee pays, and then if you went through for every single employee, and imagine that there's thousands of these, and then just changed all their pay. So instead pay 1, we're going to add to it 25 cents. Okay, and then do another line for pay 2 plus equals 25 cents, blah, 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 blah. Right, and we'd have to do that thousands and thousands of times depending on the number of employees. Right, so the idea of a loop is instead of writing 1,000 lines of code here to do this for each pay, you could just write one loop and it would loop through all the different pays and raise all of them by 25 cents. Another type of loop that we'll be doing real commonly is one that accumulates information. So maybe we want to find the sum of a bunch of numbers or find their average, is you could loop through and find the sum. And so just, roughly going back here as an example, if we use this pay example again, we could do a loop where we start off with a sum. So we just make the sum be 0 at the beginning. And then we do our loop here. And then inside of the loop, we would just say we do our sum would be whatever the sum was before and add to it like pay 1, all right, or pay, technically it would be like pay X, and then you'll loop through each time and you'll add a different pay, take these different pays and sum them all together in the loop. So each time you add like pay 1, then pay 2, then pay 3, then pay 4, all the way to the end. And then, we would know the sum of all our pays would be stored in that variable because it got increased each time in the loop, and then we could print it out or do whatever we want with it. Okay, so roughly that's kind of the two different types of loops, or two different ways to think about loops, but we'll use some of both in this chapter. Okay, so loops use a repeat code, and there's two kinds of loops. All right, there's while loops and there's for loops. So this is some stuff I would jot down quick in my notes. I'd pause the video here and say a while loop is you use when you're unsure of how many times the code's will loop. So a good example of that is again a login. If we're having our user log in, we might have to show the login dialog 3 or 4 times depending on how long it takes them to enter the right password. So we don't really know how many times it's going to run. We would just loop it until they answer correctly. Right? So that would be a while loop example. For loop is more when you know the number of times. So say that in the employee example, there was 100 employees in our district or whatever, then we would know that we need to loop 100 times, and then you could use a for loop. So for is used when you know specifically how many times you need to loop, and while is used when you don't. So that's kind of the difference. And today the focus is on while loops. The later lessons this week will talk about the for loops. Okay, so while loops, they're going to repeat until some condition is met. So you don't necessarily need to write all this stuff down here. Just maybe look over the example and see if we can walk through and make some sense of it. This is, say, a video game, and it's like a role-playing game where each time the user chooses to fight, we want to keep doing something. All right, as long as they want to fight. So this was sequential execution. We would create the scanner, that line would run. Then we'd create two new variables, those lines would run. And then we create a Boolean saying, hey, does the user want to keep fighting? And so what would happen is we could do this while loop, and this is exactly what it looks like in Java. Again, no semicolon here because it's a control structure. So it'll start right here and end right here. So all those commands are going to repeat while this wants to fight variable is true. So if looking at the code a little bit, each time the loop runs, the player's hit points were reduced by 5, and the monster's hit points were reduced by 10. And then we'll ask the user, do you want to continue? Okay, and then we're going to use scanner to get their next Boolean answer, basically then store it in the wants to fight variable and say, hey, true or false, do you want to keep fighting? So that wants to fight will change at this line right here. And then when this gets to the end, it'll go back up and do this while check again. And as long as wants to fight is true, as long as user keeps entering true, then this code will keep running. These same four lines will run again and again and again until the user hits false, saying they don't want to fight anymore. Okay, so this loop could run a whole bunch of times. All four commands run, and then we go back to the top. Right, once they enter false that they don't want to fight, then it'll go back to sequential execution, whatever commands are below that while loop. Okay, so the idea is, again, it's this code that just repeats, and this condition at some point inside the loop needs to change. All right, if you can imagine, if we took out this line here, then wants to fight would always be true, right? It wouldn't be changing, and then this loop would just keep running forever and ever and ever again because while it wants to fight is true. So usually in a loop, not usually, but pretty much all the time in a while loop, whatever this condition is right here, kind of like an if, whatever that condition is, that needs to change somewhere in the while loop. Usually on the last line of the while loop, you'll be changing that, and that'll determine if the loop continues to run or not. So here's just the syntax of it. Um, if you want to write it down, you can. If not, not a huge deal here. Just the idea that you have a condition, just like an if. So if something is true, then it'll run the statements inside the while loop. And then at the end of the statements, it'll go back up and check the condition again. If it's still true, it'll keep running, and it'll keep looping around and around and around. And then once it finally the condition is false, then it'll come back down to the bottom and start doing sequential execution. One more quick example of this. This is a number guess program, and it's saying while they have not guessed the number, we're going to have them continue to guess. So say this number guess is like some Boolean variable that's originally false, like they have not guessed the number. And as long as they have not guessed the number, we'll say, please guess a number. We will scan to get their guess. And then if their guess equals our secret number, then we will say, hey, now they've guessed the number. And so once they guess it correctly, it'll come back up here and say, okay, the number guessed is, while the number guess is not true, well, now it is true that it has been guessed, right? Whenever they get it right, then it'll come back and go down to the end. Okay, so again, the idea is you have some condition, and then at some point in there, the condition changes. So here, number guess is changing to true if they guess the correct secret number. Okay, so what's coming next is I'm going to go through some code examples with you. And I'm actually going to have you start to see if you can figure out how these while loops work a little bit. So I have this first example. We have a variable called I that gets set to 0, and we want to do while I is less than 5. We're going to print out I with a space, and then we're going to increase I. Okay, so I'm going to have you see if you can figure out what is going to be printed out to the screen when this runs. Okay, I'm back with you here, and I'm just going to hit run, and we should see that we print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The first time through, I is 0, and 0 is less than 5, so it'll print right there, and then it'll increase I to 1, come back up here and say is 1 less than 5, yep, so print out the 1 with a space, increase I to 2, is 2 less than 5? Yep. So it'll print it out and it'll keep going. Once I hits 5, once we do plus plus I and it's 5, 5 is no longer less than 5. So it will just print out. It won't go in here at all because 5 is not less than 5. And so it'll just exit the loop and go back and start continuing doing the rest of the code. When we hit run, we should see 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, next while loop for you to try. K starting at 10, while K is greater than 5, we're going to print out the value of K with a space, and then we're going to increase K. Actually, this is kind of a typo. We're going to decrease K by 1. So while K is greater than 5, we're going to print out K with a space and then subtract 1 from K. What do you think that'll print out? Back with you. So K will print 10 the first time, then it'll decrease to 9, and 9 is still greater than 5, so it'll print out the 9. It'll decrease to 8. 8 is greater than 5, etc., etc. And it'll keep going. Once it hits a value of 5 that's no longer greater than 5, so 5 will not be printed. 6 should be the last number that gets printed here. All right, and as expected, we go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and not the 5. The 5 does not get printed in that loop. Another while example for you, just trying to figure out what it prints. Starting at 6, while it's less than 20, and we're going to print M in a space, then increase M by 2. One thing that's different too is M still exists, right? It's because I created M up here outside the loop, it still exists at the end of the loop. And so I'm going to print out what is M at the very end too. So it's going to print a few things along the way and then print out M at the very end. So take a guess at what do you think is going to be displayed by this code. Hopefully you realize that M is going to print 6, then 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. And then once you hit 20, the loop will break. But M is now at a value of 20. So on this last print, M should be 20 because that's what finally made the loop break. So if we run this, you can see it displays everything. And this 20 is being displayed by this last print line there. So you can use M outside of the loop because we declared it up here. One final while loop example for you. This time we've got two variables called sum. Starts at 0, and H that also starts at 0. So what happens here is sum, you're going to add H to whatever the sum was previously each time, and then increase H by 1. Right? We're going to do this while H is less than or equal to 5, and then at the very end, print out the sum. So your job is to figure out what is going to be displayed here. Okay, back with you. So H basically is going to start at 0. So H is going to go 0, then 1, then 2, 3, 4, and it will hit 5 because we can be equal to 5. And sum is just going to be adding H each time to what it was previously. So the first time through it's 0, then 1, and then this next time through we add 2 to it, so we'd be at 3. The next loop through, maybe I can make these line up a little bit better. The next time through H will be 3, and we'll add that to our sum. The next time H will be 4, and we'll add that to our sum. So we'll be at 10. And then the final time here, H will be 5, and we'll add that to our sum, and we'll be at 15. Okay, so if we run this, should run and be 15. Okay, thank you for watching. Go on to the next objective or the next part that is found in the folder.